and welcome to this session this afternoon, Navigating Sustainability, Insights from Sports Events Experts. So really exciting discussions going to be had today, and I can't wait to get started and introduce you to the panel. Just before we do start, I'd just like to say hello from myself. I'm Will Lloyd. I am Chief Executive of Global Sports. Global Sports, for those that don't know, is we are a talent business in the sports industry, but we also operate globalsportsjobs.com, which is the leading careers and jobs platform for jobs in the global sports market. So welcome to everybody, and hopefully welcome to everybody that will be joining us as we go along this journey today. I'd also like to thank AISTS, so the International Academy of Sports Science and Technology, based in Lausanne, for those that don't know. AISTS responds to the needs of the sports industry with consulting and research to the international sports market, and by providing short courses, and it's also the world's #1 sports management master according to the Ed Universal ranking. So welcome to AISTS. I think we've also got quite a cohort of students from AISTS, and in particular the Master of Advanced Studies in Sports Management and Technology. That is a 15-month-long program and trains the future manager of the sports industry, or future managers of the sports industry, by applying a multidisciplinary approach. AISTS focuses on career acceleration by fostering networking with industry professionals, including the 700 plus alumni that already work in the sports industry. So fantastic to have AISTS on board and supporting this, and us supporting them on delivering what I think will be a very exciting webinar. Fantastic. So we are just waiting, I think, for one additional member of the panel to join us. But I think before we start, let me introduce you to Giovanni. Giovanni Battista Derci is a professor at AISTS. He will be moderating the panel today, which I'm, again, hugely excited by. It means that, well, he's significantly more knowledgeable than me around the sustainability topic and the impact that sustainability is having within sport and in particular sports events. So welcome, Giovanni. Martin from Paris 2024 as the Sustainability Project Manager in Paris. Extremely excited to have you on board as well. And I'll let you introduce yourselves, and Giovanni will take the handle very shortly. And we are just waiting for Alexandra Rickham, who is Head of Sustainability at World Sailing, to join us as well. So in essence, we have Alexandra, who is Head of Sustainability at a rights holder, a sport, a very sustainable based sport in sailing. We have Martin, who clearly is on the event side, or on the venue side, working very closely with the rights holder to understand how they can drive greater sustainability through the events that they are delivering. And we'll very much hear more about that as we progress through this session. Expertly directed and moderated by Giovanni. So that's where we are. I think, Giovanni, if you're happy, we'll kickstart this and allow Martin and your good self to introduce yourselves.
Sure.
By that stage, I know that Alexandra is just trying to connect. She won't be very long, and then we can bring Alexandra into the fold, and we can get started. But one other thing I would also like to add: questions. So if there are any questions, and I hope there will be lots of questions, please put questions in the chat. Any of the audience that want to ask a question, put it in the chat at any point. We will try and integrate those questions into the conversation so they are timely and they are fluid. If anything hasn't been asked, we'll try and bring them in at the end. But as you can imagine, we have a huge audience. We have a very exciting panel. and we have a huge topic. So it could take some time, and we only have 1 hour. So we will do our very best, but apologies for those that unfortunately we can't give an answer to their question. But please do ask as many questions as you can or want, and we'll try and get them answered. Giovanni, over to you, if I may.
Yes, thank you very much, Will. Just really a few words about myself, and then I will ask Martin also to introduce himself a little bit more. My name is Giovanni Battista Derchia. I'm a professor at AISTS and also professor at the EASHL Hospitality Business School. I've been working by researching and teaching for sport managers across and in the field of sport organization and events since now basically almost 10 years. So, and I'm a professor who research really in the field of sustainability and management practices. So which management practices can be used to foster sustainability impact. Then I will not say, let me say much more at this stage about me, since we have time scarcity. So please, Martin, if you want to say some words about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Giovanni. Hi, everyone. So I'm Martin Grimont. I studied in France for the first part of my studies in a business school near Bordeaux, and then I joined the AISTS 5 years ago. So really happy to be here today. And then after AISTS, I did a 6 months internship at the International Olympic Committee on IF's and National Olympic Committee's engagement about sustainability. And after this, I joined the Paris 2024 4 years ago and still going on 3 main topics: sustainability management according to ISO 2012-1 international regulations, sourcing and sustainable sourcing that we are implementing here, and also carbon management. So yeah, a lot to do.
So thank you, Martin. I see also that Alexandra was able to join us. So welcome, Alexandra. So Alexandra, I directly go to you, and I can ask you gently to say a few words to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, great to see everyone today. Sorry about that. We had a few technical difficulties.
No problem.
I'm Alexandra Rickham. I'm the Director of Sustainability at World Sailing. Before I had this role, well, I've been at World Sailing for 2 years as of last week, and I worked as a consultant and was seconded into Sail GP for 3 years in setting up their program. And then before that, I was a Paralympic sailor for 10 years, but my background comes from studying environmental science and policy.
Great. So you see that we have here 2 experts of sustainability in overall, but we have very particular expertise in how certain aspects of sustainability have been introduced and implemented across sport events and also within their own organization. So we have thought indeed to organize our webinar in 3 parts, and with the aim to enter a little bit more into how organization can really make an impact through implementing sustainability. So the perspective that we take today is a little bit more within organization perspective, looking at which are the management practices, processes that organization use in order to implement sustainability, and also which are the difficulties and challenges associated to this. So I propose to start with the first part. And as a first part, we thought to start discussing about one specific issue. Really, this morning I was reading an interesting empirical evidence from actually an MIT's Law Management Review, and a recent research shows that 1 out of 10 organizations, when they design their sustainability strategies, they say they integrate stakeholder perspective directly. So I think that this number is pretty clear, that there is a little bit of a, declaration execution gap. And so I thought that a very good point to start was to see how, or based on your experience, Martin and Alexandra, how you in your organization, you came up to identify and select the different sustainability priorities, knowing that sustainability is a very broad, wide, with a very broad scope, and therefore we must select what is more important than other, at least for allocating resources which are scarce, over time and across different projects. So my question was exactly to understand what, from a process and management practice point of view, your experience, what you have experienced regarding this part. So I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Alexandra, you want to take the first answer?
I'm sure.
Thank you.
At World Sailing, it's kind of a little bit twofold. So obviously I inherited the strategy that we created back in 2018, which is called Agenda 2030. And our strategy is a very holistic, big strategy piece, 56 deliverables across 6 operational areas. So everything from how we build the boats to biodiversity to participation, so both environmental and social aspects. But in terms of how those 56 deliverables were come to, is that, we worked with a consultancy, built up kind of what we thought were the major impact areas. And then we put it out to consultation to the community. So we garnered feedback from the community, and it was put out there for a public consultation for several months. And then what originally was a bigger document and had more deliverables got narrowed down into the 56 that we have currently. But obviously that's still really expansive. And I think what kind of going back to your point, quite a big thing is that, I'm in charge of the sustainability strategy, but that strategy is a part of all of the departments. So it's not my singular, I don't have singular responsibility for how we enact and how we implement on the ground. So I work with the other department heads and department members to actually enact that implementation piece. And that's really key in terms of how we prioritize. And I guess the other thing was that obviously it's called Agenda 2030. A big thing was obviously to make sure that we had time-bound targets, and some of which we meet and some of which we don't meet, because as time goes on, we learn more and we have to evolve. And so from there, we kind of set minimums for our stakeholders, depending on, for events, etc., and minimum requirements and that kind of thing. And so, it's evolving constantly.
Okay, so thank you for highlighting multiple points. I think that one point you highlighted that is very crucial is the dynamic aspect of our strategy, sustainability strategy, that evolves over time, but I also can assume I evolve also across events, because you might have events that have more specific characteristics and other, for instance, that other events with other type of characteristics, right? And I think also that you have touched upon another point that I think is very interesting. You mentioned clearly implementation of sustainability is not my only responsibility, right? So, and it's a very good point, because we observe many organizations that create organizational unit, name sustainability units, but then who is accountable then for implementing the initiative is then another, let me say, story that need specific attention. We will discuss about this actually in the next part. Thanks for anticipating this. Thank you. And Martin, what is your experience regarding that?
Thank you, Giovanni and Alexandra. As Alexandra said, I also inherited, in a sense, the strategy as it was already designed like a long time ago, even in the bid when we lost again London. So back to 2025, something like this.
Yeah, 2005.
Yeah. And so we had we already implemented some of the objectives back to that time, and after this, then we won the bid in 2017, and we really needed to discuss with a lot of stakeholders, given City of Paris, the athletes, the regions, local stakeholders, international federations as well that, as Alexandra represents today, have specific rules to follow, but also NGOs like WWF that suggested to us some objectives to implement. And today we are proud to have kept those objectives from this NGO. So that's one of the positive part of it. And then having taken into consideration all those multiple stakeholders in very specific regions, because you can imagine that, for instance, surfing is in Tahiti, sailing is in Marseille. So it's very spread. It's Paris 2024, but actually it's also in the rest part of the world. And then once we did this, we also had those like very sustainability metrics to compare the potential impact of your activity, given the experience of previous games, of course, and with those potential impact with your own activities. And we have a lot of activities. One good example of this strategy implementation, I think, but we will maybe talk about this a bit later, but is procurement. So we really had to assess the impact on every buying category of the games, the potential impact, then design the sustainability matrix, and then try to implement it. But we will talk about implementation later. But it's a very, very long process of consultation. And one interesting part that Alexandra underlined as well is the fact that it's an ongoing process. You cannot like have a sustainability strategy that is fixed over time. You really need to improve it, and that's also the part on ISO 2012 they require you to constantly take into account the needs and the evolution of the needs of your both internal and external stakeholders. So that's the tricky part, but we try to follow our objectives and to reach the targets we fixed.
So basically, if I also add a little bit, I don't want to add, just to take, let me say, the major elements actually that you have highlighted and combine them with what Alexandra mentioned. We are discussing of a process that requires consultation, so direct discussion, open discussion with stakeholders that you have, of course, carefully selected, and I think is also not necessarily an easy thing to do, not always. Then a process which is dynamic over time, and then we can come up with directly to a question that we just received that I will read you in a while, and a process that try to identify based on the feedback received by stakeholders what are the areas that are the most urgent and anyway that can provide the highest impact. So let me say, in the academic world, we also call this a little bit like materiality assessment, which is kind of, let's identify what is most important through this consensus-based approach, right? So thanks for highlighting them. We have a question, I think, on this point. Sophia asked, how often should big organizations assess the efficacy of their sustainability strategies and implementation plan? So who want to go first? Alexandra?
Sure. I mean, we are well, we're kind of constantly assessing it, if I'm gonna be
Yeah.
perfectly honest. But at the same time, we block out like every 2 years, and I think though we've written our strategy to 2030 because of the Sustainable Development Goals, I guess was the inspiration. The truth is that it will really extend to +2 because the next games will be in 2032, and at the end of the day, we're an international federation of an Olympic sport. So we try to, so every 6 months we see how we're tracking, and we look at the tracker and make sure that we're pushing forward with what we prioritized for that year or for that period. But then at 2 years we always what we've said is that 2 years we'll reinvigorate kind of the strategy and make sure that the time-bound targets are correct, that the language is correct, and also the validity of some of the objectives, because sometimes it also includes actually removing something because we're suddenly like, do you know what, this isn't actually as valid as it probably was 6 years ago, as an example.
Great, thank you.
On Paris 2024 side, I would say it depends on the scale of your event. So like for us, it's I would say constantly moving assessment as well from both internal and external parties. We have our administration council every 3 months, something like this. We have our report pre-games and post-games. Every 3 months also we named a specific committee for sustainability, composed with the external experts on all our 5 priorities. So sorry, I talked about the process a few minutes ago, but just to mention our 5 priorities that are on carbon impact reduction, circular economy, protection of biodiversity, resilience, which means how you adapt to extreme weather, for instance, and 5th one is mobilization, so how you mobilize on the 4 first pillars. But coming back to assessment, it's I would say very, very diverse depending on the scale.
Great. Thank you for both answer. I think I suggest we take one more question, which is very specific to to something that Martin mentioned, and then I think we can go to the next part. Okay. So one question is really on the from Martin, actually. Martin that wants ask Martin what actually if you can share a little bit more about the procurement process. He says, he asks, how do you verify supplies, that suppliers are more sustainable? You benchmark against each other, what you measure against, if you measure against the sustainability objective, something a little bit more. Of course, in just 1-2 minutes, because then we need to move on. But
I won't develop the whole procurement process, but just to give you a few takeaways of things that work very well in France. We have also just to mention that in international context, we have very French specificities on public procurement that actually force us to open consultation to all the markets, so we cannot really select our suppliers. But that's also a good point, because then you can use competition between the competitors based on sustainability. So one first takeaway would be to put a criteria on the tender, the public tender, and to add a strong percentage. On average, at Paris 2024, we'll put 20% on environment, both environmental and social performance. And having this, the market is aware that Paris 2024 has a very strong focus on sustainability, and so that helps us to have at the very first part the potential suppliers on board, and when you have tenders that represent, I don't know, 500 million euros or 100 million euros, 20% is a lot on the selection. Also, we recommend at a very early stage to the candidates of our tenders to have dedicated resources within the supplier staff on sustainability, so that we know who to talk with. We also organized some workshop involving top management for the candidates, and maybe a fourth takeaway is on incentives and penalties. I mean, for contract management, we add very strong specificities at a very early stage, so that then we put pressure on the potential suppliers, but also taking into consideration operational constraints. So that's a bit of a every time something we have to design on every tender we launch, but actually it works, and we'll see at the end of the game the measure of all of this.
Thank you, Martin. Alexandra, you want to add something on this, but just shortly, if you have something.
No, I mean, it's slightly different, obviously, because Martin's dealing with like massive contracts, and for the average IF or for the average sporting entity, it's much smaller. So I think sometimes it's harder to put those restrictions and to apply those constraints. I think obviously we'll talk about it a bit, I guess, in the accountability side of things for us. We make sure that we have a sustainability procurement questionnaire, and we just make sure that, in an applied sense, that we're asking the right questions to really understand who we work with, and what, what they're about, basically. And then from there, it allows us to make better decisions in the long term. But a lot of that we have to put onto our organizing authorities, because we're not, similarly to like the IOC and Paris 2024 for IFs, we don't quite often organize our own events. We have local organizing authorities in the host venues.
Of course. Thank you. So I would suggest to move to the next part. So the next part, I thought to now really enter into more how to bring sustainability in daily decisions, and talking about accountability. How accountability can be really introduced within the organization to make sustainability initiative really being designed, identified, and then implemented. We may think of an incentive system, we may think of budget, real budget being prepared, we may think of huge, or let me say, whole organizational unit being designed to take care of a specific type of initiative, or just a director of sustainability that discuss and manage a relation with all other functions. But the idea would be based on your experience, how you have seen accountability being distributed for sustainability management. So now I would ask Martin to go first, and then Alexandra to go second, right? Okay.
Thanks, Giovanni. I think it's very key point, and the first step I would say is to have a strong sustainability team. Of course, in an ideal world, you would have you wouldn't need a sustainability team. You would have sustainability being directly integrated on all functional areas. But we are not living in this world, at least for now. And so we are lucky to have 20 people, almost 20 people in Paris 2024, working directly on sustainability on the environmental side, and we have a slightly lower team for legacy, so all the social aspects. And we also work very closely with the procurement team. So I would say, so first, when I said have a strong team, I would say also to make alliance with teams that have a strong link with sustainability activities. So of course procurement, but also key operational functional areas such as infrastructure, technology, where you can do a very, positive project. Second recommendation would be also with internal stakeholders. So what we did, we built a system of reference directly for people involved in other functional areas, so operations. And so what was tricky for us was when we had to switch from a central organization to a venue organization. So for us, very tricky to follow what happens on operational implementation. So we built this system of reference based on self-willingness of those people. And we were surprised to have very motivated people. And then once we had this group, we also provided them with specific trainings on sustainability, so that beyond the event they can also underline this sustainability experience on their CV. And they are really useful at this time to follow what happens. And maybe a third takeaway is that what we did with even general managers, so the venue directors of Paris 2024, they were named a few months ago, I would say. And so we had a meeting with all of them. We explained what we did, what is Paris 2024 vision, and what are their. We presented also the key responsibilities on site, and to make sure they are the final responsible for social and environmental performance at the venue scale. So we tried, as we do, we were currently almost 20 people, but it's not 40, and we have more than 40 venues, and we also need to keep people for transversal expertise. So that's what we did to try. So to sum up, each venue has a even general manager that is responsible for sustainability, and each venue has also a sustainability reference that is close to operation to monitor that everything is ongoing the right way, I'd say.
Yeah. Alexandra?
Sure. So our accountability, I guess, is a lead on from the identifying the priorities section. And so it's not easy for IFs. As I mentioned, we usually have a local host venue. So for like our events, it's a little bit more complicated to make sure. So like we'll put in so the first way that we do it is that within the bids and within our contracts that we have with those venues, we put in stipulations of minimums or things that we require. So for example, for our World Championships, that's obviously like a scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon footprint. It would be reductions around the use of support fleet and boats and that sort of thing. There's a plethora of different requirements that we set out. That being said, because we're in and out of a venue, it can be very difficult to ensure accountability. It's not like when you have a league where you have a repeat venue and you're always going back. And so it's in the interest of that venue or that host city to deliver and to be accountable to you. So now we're really working on actually how do we influence that accountability beyond the contract after, and if they haven't delivered, what we're looking at is maybe setting up a scheme of like almost like a legacy trust, not legacy trust, but like an amount of money, a legacy but deposit. And if they don't deliver on that, then we say, okay, we're going to take that amount of money and we're going to make sure that we do something in that area, or we do something within the sailing community that is going to deliver the same impact. So it's basically an impact fund. So that's one thing that we're playing with at the moment, because we've seen before and we know that other IFs are struggling with the same thing. I think internally, a really interesting model. So from our perspective internally, I think we have, pretty good engagement. We struggle on certain areas, sometimes around transport. That can always be an interesting one. But I do like what the IOC have done, which is they've assigned carbon budgets. And that's something that we're looking at and playing with, where actually at a departmental level, we assign, a budgetary requirement, which then means that you have to work within that sphere, and that aligns to our reduction plan, because we are a sport for climate action signatory. So I think there are a few different tools that we utilize, across the way. And then it's also things just like what have we signed up for? Because I think that also creates accountability. If you know that you've signed up to the UN or you've signed up to this organization, then actually within our organization, people then feel more accountable to making sure that, that we don't go down in terms of what we've done. So I think, yeah, there are a few different ways of kind of breaking it up, but I would say those are the keys.
Great, thank you. So let me say, let me take a question, okay? Then just to try to address anyway a few points also from our audience. There is a question on from Julie. Julie says, based on your experience with sustainability, on sustainability reporting and impact assessment, I selected this question because talk about transportation, and anyway we know that transportation is one of the major issue regarding environmental sustainability. So she says transportation in fact always come at the top of the list, whether we are local or international event. So it makes even makes our actions taken to counterpart carbon impact very relevant often, right? So what is your recommendation regarding how, but is more the recommendation, I would say, what is your experience and how would you see to what could be done to address transportation challenges? So you already have mentioned, Alexandra, correctly, for instance, that the IOC has introduced a carbon budget really focusing on transportation. So this is the major area that they want to control, okay? Your experience, Alexandra, and then Martin on this to give an answer to Julie. Thank you.
Sure. So obviously there's the IOC way. There's also how you can influence your choices. So I think a lot of organizations at the moment are looking towards like sustainable aviation fuel and looking at how they can work with airline partners or with the airlines to effectively reduce their footprint by making sure that they're either investing in it or that the flights that they're utilizing are actually using them. So that's one key area. So that's something that we're investigating currently because we have our annual conference in different parts of the world. And then I would say the other thing is also just hard line, just making decisions about what that line is going to be that you're going to stick to. So for the World Championships last year, it was in The Hague. Everybody except for 2 staff members because of certain issues got on the train to The Hague, and and that was the decision that was made. The only thing I will flag on that front is the difficulty is just the costs associated and the budgetary implications, because unfortunately we still need to push our governments a lot harder in terms of the fact that to get a rail ticket to like Marseille would cost me 2 to 3 times more currently than it is for me to fly from London. And that's really problematic, because even when you want to do the right thing as a smaller sporting organization, it can be very difficult. You have to make really hard decisions about how you spend your money.
And we see here one of the classical trade-off that sustainability requires, because you often have conflicting interest. So cost on the one side, initiatives that are good initiatives, the right initiatives on the other side, right? So of course now we need from a financial point of view, since I am in that field, a good narrative to discuss to the CFO typically is the best way to try to have him or her on board to support such a decision. But still, it's a difficult balance, indeed. Martin, any input from you?
Yeah, just to put a bit of context for Paris 2024. So we have 3 main thirds of carbon emissions. First is around 33% on operations. So what basically we do in terms of operation during the games. We also have 1/3 on construction. So on this one, we had a lot of leverage to build much less than the previous games, using 95% of existing infrastructure for competitions. And last one is of course transportation. So it's very difficult to reduce this one. On operations, you can find a lot of solutions. Construction, I just talked about this, but transportation, of course, you can engage with IFs and NOCs, especially the ones that are nearby countries, to come to use the train.
Of course.
You can also communicate on the train's benefits to all the stakeholders, working closely with the regions and stuff. But when it comes to spectator transportation, you're not going to ask someone coming from the USA or Australia to use a sailing boat, even though it would be nice. But we try to reduce, and we are committed to to divide by 2 the emissions compared to the emissions of London and Rio. But then when it comes to spectator transportation, it's the whole international sports model that is being questioned, and it's not only on the side of the event, it's also to the governments, to the IOC can help as well. The international federations, the athletes also are very great ambassadors, and we start to see some athletes refusing to participate to some events because of carbon footprint. So that's a very interesting part, but there is still a lot to do, I would say.
Sure. So I think this is another interesting point that you mentioned, which is in order to tackle specific sustainability issues, especially the major ones, you need indeed to extend the discussion to institutional organization, or anyway other institutional parties, other stakeholders in general, because of course alone the single organization organizing the event cannot do much. Talking about externalities, by definition externality require a broader approach, right? So, and this is in line also to a comment that we have from Mazedi. Mazedi says, I think the problem with transport is also that encourage us to improve our transportation system to be able to accommodate people, especially to global sport event. We have to make effort around how we can procure transport for our athletes. So in my idea behind my interpretation behind this comment is also that, of course, we need to be innovative, think of different solutions, collaborating with stakeholders in order to come up with ideas that can have an impact. This for sure. This is of sure within the span of responsibility of the people accountable for managing sustainability. Indeed. Okay, so then I think we can move to the last part for this webinar. So to conclude, we thought to try to highlight a little bit what, based on your experience or your current experience, what do you think are the most urgent and difficult, challenging aspect that managing sustainability requires in order to have an event that is really more sustainable, that really goes into the direction to achieve, it's difficult to say full sustainability, I think, but anyway, that really can show a significant progress. So to highlight really on the key challenges now that we are facing, and the most urgent ones, where really as a manager we should put our attention on, right? Alexandra, you want to start this time? So if it's okay to you?
Sure, yeah, I can do. So I think we're well, it's a few things. So one key thing, and obviously since we're on the transport issue, is it's great, you know, we're going into Paris, you know, we're coming to the end of the Paris cycle. It's been a European Olympics and we're based in Europe. But now, you know, for me, my head is already looking towards Los Angeles and how do we tackle that the distance problem that we immediately have in front of us, you know, so on the transport front. And actually, what's difficult is that we're on a constantly moving chessboard. It's a bit like sailing, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
You know, and in terms of an IF, the realities are that, you know, we get told where our games is, and then we have to figure out exactly how are we gonna keep producing, how are we gonna implement all of these changes, how are we gonna be able to do all of this when we know that factually even just moving our staff to the games venue is going to be, you know, significantly greater than that of what we've obviously been able to do for Paris. So I think that's, you know, at the forefront of my brain, even though we haven't even gotten into Paris yet. And then I think in terms of generally, the issues that we're facing are the climates that we're operating in. You know, I think, and I'm sure Martin will say the same. You know, I think bigger drivers outside of what we can do on the ground are making it quite difficult in terms of whether that's around budgetary issues, based on, you know, the cost of living crisis that we're in at the moment, and inflation situation, the political situation, which is also impacting quite heavily on, you know, interestingly on sports as a general. So I think it's funny how the externalities have kind of really started to come together and are having a greater impact on how we enact, you know, on a daily basis, really, and what we're having to think about, because yes, there's the environmental side, but obviously I also, you know, have a look over the diversity and equity and inclusion side of our sports. And, you know, very much we're having to think more about, you know, how do we look after people? How do we make sure that we have fair sport? You know, all of these things. So I think it's the wide gamut of sustainability that can often be the most difficult thing.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Alexandra, for sharing this. Martin, if you want to...
completely agree with what Alexandra just said, and maybe to mention another example of a very, I would say maybe the biggest challenge, like right now for Paris 2024 and sustainability, I'd say is it's internal and external stakeholders mobilization, which is also one of our biggest opportunities, I said, because we managed to do a lot of very nice projects with all the stakeholders that I mentioned previously. But of course, when it comes to operations, just imagine we are a kind of a startup, like rising. When I joined 4 years ago, we were 150 people, and now we are almost 3,000 without counting suppliers. We just hosted a few weeks ago our volunteers convention with 20,000 people on board. So and sustainability is not always very simple to explain as well. So carbon footprints is not something that can be easily perceived. Circular economy maybe sometimes more, because then you can imagine the garbage and all the volumes associated. But when you have this size of organization, now that it is also spread into different venues, how you deal with operational people, newcomers. Before we had a very I would say strict onboarding, but for now, just to be able to reach every people is so difficult, and the more you advance to the games delivery, the more people are like, but I need to deliver on time. This is not my top priority. I'm sorry, I love animals, but this is not my top priority.
Yeah, of course.
So so that's a huge challenge.
I think that
for us,
with what you both said, Alexandra and Martin, I think we may conclude just with highlighting two major points that you have identified. I mean, the complexity of managing different interests at the end, because at the end you always, you know, when a person needs to commit and achieve a specific goal, time pressure, resource scarcity, and then you need to add also other specific elements to consider that are more in line with sustainability type of decisions. not always these type of elements are in line with time pressure, with the goal that needs to be done, and so on, right? With resource scarcity and so on. So at the end, I think that a key message is it's difficult to manage sustainability. It requires a very delicate balance of conflicting interest. Typically, you don't do this in a short term. You do it over time. Is it of course true that one of the difficulty of event is that the event typically can be concentrated into a period of time without talking about the preparation and the legacy part, but if you just take the period of time where the event takes place, this is where the combination of all interests should be in the most balance in some way, right? So it's not easy to achieve that, indeed. So we don't have the time to take additional question, I would say. So I really would love to thank everybody who has added comments and anyway also provide us with other question. We are sorry we cannot take it. And thanks for the participation. I also would love to thank, of course, especially Alexandra and Martin for their contribution. It was very enriching. I like it a lot. So thank you very much for what you said. I think we came up with some very interesting discussion. Now, of course, I leave the floor to Will for the remaining for the closure of the webinar. Will,
Giovanni,
the stage is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Fantastic moderator that you are, Giovanni. Much appreciated. And Martin and Alexandra have done a fantastic job in enlightening us to some of the challenges and opportunities that exist in the major event market. I'm very conscious that the majority of the audience, and I say the majority, I'm not wholly sure where they will come from, but a lot of them are from AISTS and are on a journey to start their careers ideally in the sports industry, and certainly the audience that we've got today are very interested in sustainability. And I think there was one question that Yvonne posed earlier that I'd like to, as a parting gift, like to ask Alexandra and Martin their thoughts. But Yvonne has asked, as an incoming student to AISTS program,
is a good question. Bravo.
What would be your suggestions on best preparing for a role in the sustainability area? Martin, clearly you've come through the sort of more traditional academic route, and Alexandra has been an athlete herself. So let's just sort of start with you, Martin, if I may, just to help these very excited and enthusiastic students on how they should be preparing for a role in the sustainability area.
I think on my side, I was lucky because I have a family, friends that are really into sustainability business. So I already heard of it before starting this career. One good idea for me was I think it was to do my research paper on sustainability back to AISTS. So it was more on social aspects, but social, environmental, and economical aspects are very strongly linked. And then also I was lucky to reach this position at the IOC on IFs and NOC engagement. So I think it's really a process. Also, you can talk with people on sustainability, people on LinkedIn when I can, and I every time I try to answer. And also we also need a lot of benchmark, because a lot of events are doing things, but every time you have the very specific aspects of an event or another. So yeah, so just keep your eyes on all these components, and I'm sure you will find the way for this.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Martin. Alexandra, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think obviously everything Martin said, and I think also just preparing yourself to be resilient, because you end up having to take a lot on the chin as a sustainability professional, and yeah, so I think So it's not all doom and gloom is the important thing. You need to, you know, a positive outlook is really key to doing this role and taking people on that journey.
And maybe
Alexandra.
one last message is, if I may, is that you don't need to be in a sustainability department to be a great sustainability actor. We often think that you really need to be in this sustainability team, but it has been proved many times here in Paris 2024 that some operational at every level, operational people, directors, volunteers, that they can really embed sustainability and be our best ambassadors at the end. So yeah, that's another point.
Will, may I add a thing?
Please
So
do.
yes, I mean, from an education point of view, if I may say, what we observe across multiple business schools is that the first key element in terms of skill that is needed is critical thinking.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
since it is a very broad, complex, multidisciplinary type of discipline, and where there is a lot of uncertainty still regarding how to tackle these issues, the way people look at this critically is what people need to come up with solutions, with ideas, with innovations in some way. So this is the first element that I would love to highlight. Secondly, if I may say, we are still observing sustainability type of jobs that are not always that specific, but they're almost, let me say, a little bit generalistic. In line with what Alexandra was saying, you need to be resilient because at the end you end up to do many things. In the future, probably this will be different because we will see some specialization more clearly being developed. So probably, for instance, Alexandra, Alexandra basically has view a little bit everything, not a little bit, a lot of everything. So, but for instance, a profile like her coming from environmental engineering in the future might be very more specific, let me say, for more specific type of task. But so far, I don't think we are still there. But this is probably the trend, considering the importance, the level of resources that will be allocated more and more into this.
Thank
This
you,
is a little
Giovanni.
bit what we observe.
Yeah, no, the frustrating thing with all of these sessions is I feel that we've just opened up another can of worms and that we could go on for another hour talking about what, you know, what are the big sort of game changers that are likely to happen in the next couple of years that students can potentially start to focus in on and actually steal a march on those types of opportunities as they start to navigate their careers in not only sport but also in sustainability as a function within sport. But we're going to have to wait for another day and another time. But Giovanni, Alexandra, Martin, and all of the audience that have participated today, whether it's listening, whether it's sending out the questions or just being present, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you very much to AISTS as well for putting on this webinar, supporting it in the way that they have, and actually uncovering some fantastic content to help the audience in shaping their future. So thank you all very much, and I wish you all a very good day. Best wishes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank
It was
you
a
so
pleasure.
much.
It was a real
Bye-bye.
pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you, Global
Bye-bye.
Sport.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.